episode 5, season 2 of Elevated Businesses, where I have conversations with cannabis entrepreneurs. Today, I dive deep into cannabis, compliance, technology, and APIs. Rose Elliott is the co-founder and CEO of Komplyd, an API-first cannabis compliance as a service platform. Rose has over 2 decades in engineering and product experience. She is bringing this experience of delivering large-scale platforms and complex compliance initiatives at companies such as PayPal, Netflix, Upwork, and Tenable to the cannabis industry. Her passion for health and wellness led her to the cannabis plant and ultimately to the industry where she is committed to making cannabis compliance work for everyone, operators and technology solutions included. So let's dive right into the conversation. Rose, you and I first met, I think it was May 2020. And what you are trying to solve or are solving really intrigued me. There's not a lot of women in cannabis, especially, not a lot of women in cannabis technology, especially women compliance cannabis technology. So I would love to start there. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started in the industry, and then later on in the conversation, I really want to dive into like payment compliance and the solutions that you are solving for the industry.
Absolutely. So, I'm Rose. I'm the CEO of Komplyd, Compliance as a Service Platform, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But my background, first, I'm born and raised in Massachusetts, but I've been in California for over 20 years. So I feel like I've been in the best of both worlds. But my background is actually in engineering and product and engineering leadership. And you had mentioned payments. I've been kind of consider myself industry agnostic. And I've been on the consumer side, the enterprise side, fintech, cybersecurity. But I got interested in cannabis. Well, first, I've had a relationship, I've a bit of allergies, sorry.
Okay.
I've had a relationship with the cannabis all the way back to junior high. But in more recent years, I started learning about the health and wellness applications of the plant. And I became literally fascinated by it. And I started learning as much as I could, specifically about the plant. And I enrolled in Cannabis Training University online, so I could learn as much as I possibly could. And again, completely and utterly fascinated by it. And I knew, like, immediately, it's a game changer. It's going to change the world. And as we all know that it's going to completely disrupt medicinal, recreational, alcohol industries. But when then you start talking about hemp, and it goes even further. And so I wanted to understand at that point, how does the industry work? So I started meeting with people I knew that were in the industry and getting introductions to others. And I wanted to understand, how does this work? What are the challenges? And most importantly, how can I contribute? How can I use my skills to help an industry that I am extremely passionate about? And what I learned and heard over and over and over again were about the challenges of cannabis compliance. And I, thought pretty hard about that. And that's when I, being a technologist at heart, I got, there's got to be a technical solution to this. And that's when I started really the idea for Komplyd and reaching out to people and vetting the possible solution with cannabis operators. Absolutely. And that's where it all began.
Love it. And some of those health benefits, cannabis really drew me to the health benefits as well. I get debilitating migraines. I have a condition called pseudotumor cerebri. So I went, crazy story, but I went blind for 10 days when I was 4 years old. And I had very invasive eye surgery on my optic nerve, and that the side effects of that is tied to migraines and the spinal fluid and having too much pressure that can cause blindness essentially. And so like growing up very heavy on like pharmaceuticals and things like that, went down a very bad path there, like in college. And thankfully cannabis, I got to learn all of these things. I think one of the first products that really came on my radar was Mary's Medicinals in their patches.
Mm-hmm.
Love
Yeah.
those. Those are absolutely incredible. And so I really resonate with the wellness and health aspect and just how much this is just a disruptor for, like you said, alcohol, tobacco, hemp. We haven't even tapped into hemp with like hempcrete
Right.
and things like that. And so
Right.
I just love that you have that passion for the plant. It's just so important, I feel, in this industry. And sometimes on the technical side, we can be, you know, in the trenches of the minutia there. And so really coming back with that passion for the plant, I think is extremely
Right.
important. So with that being said, oh yeah, what were you going to say?
No, I was just green.
Oh, okay, no worries. I didn't want to cut you off. And so, with that being said, what are the solutions that you are solving with your software?
Yeah, so as you know, for cannabis operators, right now well, let me start like kind of what the problems are and how we're solving
Please,
it.
that's great.
First off, from a technical standpoint, in most mature industries, cannabis is a very nascent industry. In mature industries, there's technical infrastructure, reels, if you will, that not only for compliance, but interoperability, et cetera. And that is completely missing in the cannabis space today. Um, and what we're finding is there are, several, I would actually say there's probably currently a handful of cannabis technology companies and operations that are able to organically expand into new markets because of these regulatory complexities and the instability of the reporting tools, et cetera. And compliance is a utility or a commodity. It's not optional. And we've built a solution that ultimately will level the playing field for companies to expand into new markets while maintaining compliance. And what I mean by that is imagine, I'm only talking about the second automation piece of it, but imagine one API, one data model, every state with the added accessible data, because that's a problem, stability, protective guardrails, analytics, fraud detection, all of that as added values. And that's what we're making that dead simple.
Okay, got it. And so,
And that's
to back up a minute, your target audience or like the people that you're solving for are the third party technology solutions that are integrated into traceability, state traceability platforms, or are there other people that are like your ideal client?
we're focusing primarily initially on cannabis technology solution providers, those technology companies, as well as cannabis operators with their own engineering teams that are looking to either enter and expand new markets or are already in markets and just understand that what they're utilizing is not working, it's not sustainable, it's not scalable, it's kludgy, and they obviously don't want the burden of maintaining that anymore and want to put that off on others. But there are other industries we are expanding into, cannabis industry, but as you know, when legalization accelerates either safe banking or federal legalization, all of your traditional mainstream industries, if you will be in.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
they will absolutely require this underlying infrastructure if they're not already building it.
Yeah.
To be clear, in order to rapidly enter and expand, they will require it. And as I mentioned, these are what they call the rails, the technical rails in other industries. And that's what we want to be able to expand into these markets. And as these adjacent verticals, that's the term I was looking for,
Okay.
adjacent verticals come into cannabis, we will be supporting them as well. And that gets into cannabis, fintech, and banking, et cetera,
Okay. Got
as
it.
well as payments.
Got it. Okay. And so, just to back up a minute, because some of our listeners might not know some of these technical terms that we're using. So, do you mind breaking down like API, fintech, technology rails, like kind of break those down into layman's
Sure,
terms for me?
sure. So fintech is financial technology, and that's the PayPal's, the Stripes, even like Square, and then of course all of your banking, anything having to do with financial technology. And the term regulatory technology gets kind of associated with fintech, so they have
Got it.
reg tech and fintech. Um, But regulatory technology actually does expand past financial technology. It's into health technology, cannabis. All of these other adjacent verticals require regulatory technology as well.
Got it.
And then APIs are application programming interfaces. So outside of cannabis, API first is what we call it. You're building an API first, and then applications, or what you as a user would see, that business application or user interface integrates with that. And then it's just an API, application programming interface endpoint. But outside of cannabis, it's compliance, fraud detection, risk management APIs are table stakes.
Okay.
And what they address outside of cannabis is many of the same compliance pieces that every cannabis company is going to need to adhere to, in addition to these cannabis regulations. Right. Sorry, it gets even worse. So in financial world, is where me and my two co-founders come from. There's what you hear AML and KYC all the time. What that means is anti-money laundering and know your customer. It's really validating that the businesses and the transactions and the users are all real.
Okay.
And you do run into that, not only in fintech. I ran into that in other industries as well. Whenever there's money passing, I worked on what is now called Upwork, but used to be Odesk. And we had to be very, very careful about that because people were hiring people across jurisdictions, not just in the US, but globally, and money's transferring. So all of those compliance pieces come into play with that, and risk management, all of that. And we're taking that same approach to cannabis compliance. We're looking at cannabis compliance as a data problem, because ultimately that's what it is. It's enormous amounts of scattered, inaccessible, and unstructured data.
Yeah, a very big patchwork, just always trying to fill those pieces. And it's the reason why I asked the API question. It's funny because I guess when I try and explain an API, I try and explain it as think of it as you're sitting at a restaurant at a table, and like your table is one application, and then the kitchen is another application, and the server is the one that's going between the kitchen and your table, mm-hmm. and like transferring things between each other. And sometimes when people think API or automation, it's like, oh, this will just work. This will just do it for me. But as we know, there's a lot of complexity there. Like there are a lot of things that are so hard. I mean, you and I first started working together almost 2 years ago, almost to the day. Mm-hmm. And it was because we were talking about the metric API and the mm-hmm. lack of documentation and lack of communication there. And now you've expanded into other states like Leaf Data and BioTrack and mm-hmm. things like that. Do you mind speaking to a little bit of your experiences with those 3 major state traceability platforms and some of the complexities you've had to solve there?
Absolutely. They're all, the interesting piece of it is they're all complex in and of themselves. So there's the way I found just working with one is complexities, even inconsistencies with one instance. And to be clear, all of these systems, at least to this day, are separate instances per state. So there isn't data. It's not like a multi-tenant. It's not one system that serves multiple states and where you can go in and see data across. There are different instances and there's inconsistencies between them. Even in, say, just take metric. Sometimes your tag is a label, sometimes it's a name, sometimes it's an ID, and it's different. And if that was standard across states, that's great, but it's not.
Yeah.
If you go to another state, it's different. But this part here is just the API. And then if you go into another reporting tool, the semantics are completely different and they have their own inconsistencies and complexities. But even more on top of that is these systems have different, for lack of a better term, philosophies. They're very different. I know you and I think, okay, seed to sale, there's only one way to do it, right? Well, there's not. Yeah. Not in reporting it. I'm like, yes, you plant and you grow and you waste and you do all this stuff and it goes down the line, but it's not reported as linear as that in all of the systems, and it's very, very different. And we have abstracted out those differences, but also applied the rules to it. So what we've found is these systems allow you to do things you should not be able to do. Now, just to be really clear, I'm a longtime product and engineering person, and I don't believe in ever preventing someone from doing something they really, really want to do. But there's some things that you should prevent. Like, we're not going to let you get to negative inventory.
Yeah.
We're not going to let you remove material from a plant that no longer exists. You've already removed it all. There's certain things that we will prevent, but there are things where we'll just provide a warning where it's, we'll allow you to do this, but this may raise a red flag and you may be cited with a violation.
Yeah.
And so then someone can make a decision based on that, how they want to handle it. One of the really biggest complexities that I've found with the systems is, in speaking to the end users as well as the technology solution providers, is the reconciliation and synchronization with these systems. That's one of the major problems. And part of that is there's two major reasons. One, not everything's available through the API.
Yeah.
So some things you have to go to the GUI. But even then, if everything was available through the API, you can't prevent someone from going over to the GUI and doing something. Right. And so you've got to maintain consistency with that. And that's something that we're addressing from several different angles, both addressing from keeping you in sync, but also reconciling if an edge case happens and you actually do fall out.
Yeah, that's such a huge challenge, because just speaking from the API, as we know, some third-party systems might have something called a lifetime API. So they're submitting data within 5 minutes of that physically occurring. And as we know, specifically with Metric, there's a loading problem there too with how much data you can submit. And then other systems are waiting until the end of the day and submitting all of the stage data at once. And so you're essentially like in this limbo, especially as like a dispensary or retailer. I mean, even upstream supply chain, like distribution and trying to create a manifest and a transfer like that in itself. If you have a lag there, that's a challenge in itself. So I absolutely love that you're building these safeguards. It's absolutely needed. I like to say, specifically with Metric, because that's what I have the most experience in compared to BioTrack or Leaf Data. But I always like to say Metric's a reporting system. And so it's going to let you do whatever the hell you want. Like if you
and there's reasons for that. And I get it. There are reasons for that.
Yeah, definitely. For a regulatory standpoint, it's easy to catch red flags. And if people are truly managing their inventory control, and if that's truly happening, that's a very easy quote unquote red flag to handle. But a lot of problems, very immature industry. We don't have the tools like you've seen, like you've came from PayPal, you mentioned Upwork, you also came from Netflix. What are some of those more mature technology companies? What are those strategies that you're trying to implement that you've learned from those larger companies?
Well, the biggest thing is, I'm going to throw a word out there that means many different things to many different people, but platform. So my experience, like I said, I've been on engineering product, and I've been on the UI side of the house all the way back to the data space and back and forth. But one of the things that I tend to end up doing, and at least the last 4 places I've worked, is either building myself or leading the team to build platforms. And by that, I mean is reusable components. So, for instance, PayPal, they have, and I think you talked to my co-founder, they have almost 2,000 compliance and risk experts.
Wow.
That is just, well, understand they're in hundreds of countries, countries you've never heard of. And then and the rules and regulations and the risks are all different in every single one of them, never mind local jurisdictions. But that number doesn't even include the product and engineering teams that are dedicated to building these platforms out. But these are sophisticated compliance and risk platforms that do all sorts of modeling, etc., that these companies build. I mean, PayPal does that, but they're able. I mean, I've worked at PayPal, but even prior to that, I know enough about them that they are secure, and that's a company I trust. and they can't be non-compliant, and they can't even acquire a company that can't fit on their rails. And the same with Netflix. They have platform teams at I say Upwork because the history is Odesk Elance merged became Upwork. So when I was there, I started building the UI platform team. It was me and one engineer. I had my first engineer, and when I left, we had a platform team for the back end, the middle tier. I had a huge team that was distributed all over the world, and even the last company I worked at Tenable, which is a public cybersecurity company. Same thing. I was building platforms from all the way from integration layer all the way to the UI component, UI framework and components, localization, all of it. And so that our teams, our product teams or feature teams, if you will, could just either boot up a new feature or even a new product based on these components. They come as building blocks or Legos. Pull this in and I can build a business app, and it's that whole API endpoint. So you're building out this interesting feature and then just hitting these services. Of course, they did have to build some of their backend for whatever that new product was, but all the common core stuff, the authentication, the compliance, the localization, all of the UI components, all the stuff that can be reused should be reused. And that's where the compliance, we look at compliance, and you can't, well, in any industry, but in cannabis, it's a commodity. It is a utility, and everybody needs it. And everybody's trying to build it and playing whack-a-mole, and maybe just one layer that everyone can plug into and build out and just really push this whole industry forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's a major barrier right now.
And just all the patchwork, just not only from state traceability, local, state to state. Hell, when we start to throw federal in there eventually, like that might either help us or hurt us, help us from a standardization standpoint, or they could add so much red tape that like for us, I mean, as compliance experts, like good for our business, bad for the industry. Like people shouldn't be so have all this red tape for a plant that they're pretty much treating like it's heroin or something like that.
Yeah, that's less disturbing, but
like it shouldn't be treated like any of this. And so help us or hurt us, who knows? Talking about federal legalization could be a whole other episode in itself. But
I have my thoughts on that. My suspicion is like anything else, it'll be an additional. It's not going to get easier because federal legalization. It'll be like any other highly regulated industry. It'll be one more layer. But my suspicion is like anything, like even just introducing process to a company that has none. You go like this, you go way beyond where you need to be, and then you have to dial it back. And that's what I suspect will happen I do believe it will happen when federal legalization happens. I'm not entirely sure. I'm somewhat optimistic, but not entirely, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that interstate commerce will come prior to federal legalization. I'm wondering how I know that California is trying to push for that. And I know that there's some lobby groups as well talking about treaties and things like that and how that will work. But that's another problem that we actually solve that is not solvable with the current reporting tools implemented today, because there is no visibility across state lines. And when interstate commerce happens, now you could talk about that patchwork. We like to say it's a patchwork at every level of legislation. So you've got your state, your county, your local, and then you're going to have the same thing on the other side of the transaction. And then what happens if it's going through illegal states? So there's all these more multiple levels of regulations that you're going to have to adhere to. And that's, systems have to be architected properly to be able to handle that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking of that compliance framework around licensing, like as we know in California, we have a very heavy distribution model in California, but other states don't exactly require a distributor to be able to transfer from B2B. Who is the one doing the testing in the supply chain, and where and when in the supply chain is that testing taking place? packaging and labeling, how is that going to be different from state to
Mhm.
state? So it's like all of
Right.
these like different aspects. And you brought up a really great one, transporting in between illegal states that aren't legal yet. Like that's one I didn't even think about, because I'm just watching California, Washington, and Oregon like really
Yeah.
push for this. I'm like, oh, they're all connected, it'll be fine. But like all of the Colorado, like how would we? Well, we have New Mexico and Oklahoma to a certain degree on the medical side,
Mhm.
but yeah, it's just such a huge complex challenge. And I'm of the belief, like, yes, interstate commerce would be great for a certain time, but I feel like it's just kicking the can down the road. I feel like
Yeah.
people want to do interstate commerce because we have an oversupply problem, and so they're trying to get that supply out to help stabilize pricing. And
Mhm.
if we open up interstate commerce and then cool, we got all this supply out, like prices stabilize, but then what? Do you then start producing more to keep up with like your out of state and interstate commerce? It's so interesting, and
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like, I feel like it's a band-aid. Let's just put it that
I
way.
think it's a band-aid, but I mean, federal regulation needs to happen so we can do interstate commerce just legally and not have to deal with all of that. But I do really, really look forward to that. And I do, as a also longtime wine lover, I like the idea of, I guess, the Appalachians. And I know,
Of course,
I'm
yes.
the tribal, they're trying to push some stuff here in California for that. But I like that. If, I'd like to get this and I want it from grown here. And I
Yeah,
want to be able to buy it in this state, even though I don't want to have to travel there and try to get it
I
over to
agree.
where I'm at. I want to be able to, ship it in if I want it.
Yeah, I resonate
And
with that a
that's,
lot. I agree. Just like I want my weed from Southern Humboldt, or maybe I want something from Southern California, like, and sit here in Colorado and get it delivered. That would be awesome.
that's my ideal world.
Yes, I love it. And we'll get there one day, hopefully. I mean, I know the MORE Act is like really big in the news right now. We don't know if it'll actually pass the Senate. But it's in the news. People are talking about it. People are looking at it to help us out with like this economic downfall that we're having right now and things like that, and to be our savior. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I just think that we really need to not only reduce the barrier to entry, but also to help with the taxes and like 280E and just how complicated all of that is. And on the note of taxes, let's talk about taxes and point of sales and payment systems. I see, I know a lot of things I'm throwing at you right now. I
Yeah.
see on the point of sale side, a lot of these point of sales are developing like these payment systems, and I am not exactly clear on like what the regulation or compliance piece of that is, what those risks are. I've been in dispensaries where they have their own little card, like debit card almost, that you can use. And then I also saw things in the news about Visa talking about the cashless ATMs and how they're like, nope, that is a no-go. And pretty much almost nearly every single dispensary you can walk into and use your card uses that cashless ATM. Coming from PayPal and your extensive experience there, give me some thoughts on these payment systems and what some of those risks are that people need to be aware of.
I would say it's highly risky. Like, you mentioned the cashless ATM, and that's interesting because you meant Visa. They said that's a loophole. Like your what's the word? Like your game in the system to do something that we've said is against our regulations or our terms of agreement. And I don't know if they're going. They publicly said it, but I don't know if they're actually physically coming after people just yet. But they're the first, and others will say the same thing. And for those, the cashless ATM really is just this kind of middle thing. Like you move cash to here, and then it moves it to there. So, but you're just trying to trick them, saying, "I'm not really buying cannabis with this. I'm
Yeah.
doing whatever this thing is in the middle." And so that's problematic. And I'm sure they're all scrambling trying to figure out how they're going to get around that. Also, if you even just take the cannabis piece out of it, there's so much compliance that goes around payments. And that's what I was alluding to. Like when I was at PayPal, they were in over 160 countries. They're actually, at the time they said over 200, but they didn't adhere to rules and regulations and all, but over 160 that they had localization and adhered to the rules. And it's crazy. And what they have to put in, there's literally rules around how you can transfer from one to the other, and from one country to the other, et cetera, and what you can do. But even outside of payments, even just data, there's everybody in this industry, they're going to have to think of HIPAA.
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
HIPAA's
Illinois has already
such
made the switch, but that's a
a
big
deal.
one. When you go global, you can't, there's certain places their data has to sit in their thing, and you can't touch it if you're from the US. You have to have like engineers outside of the US touch the data
Wow.
in some of the countries in the EU. But on the payment side, I find it interesting that they're building their own payments gateways, because when this does, it's not a feature. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
A payment gateway is not a feature. It is an entire huge product that takes at least hundreds, if not thousands, of people to build.
Wow.
And if you're putting something out there, that's in more than, like, you can build something smaller, start in one area, but they're putting it out there. I would be very concerned at the, what's the word I'm looking for? Not only the scalability and the stability of it, but the compliance side of it.
Right.
It's because you have your PCI, you have your PII, and that's personal identifiable information, and the payment card information,
Thank
et
you.
cetera. There's all sorts of stuff. There's all sorts of, I swear to God, when you start at these companies, you get pages of acronyms that you have to learn. I'm not kidding. I'm not even kidding. That's orientation day one. Here's your
Oh my
acronyms.
goodness.
But there's just the payment rails are very complex. There's a lot of moving pieces to it, and as you mentioned, the cashless ATM, I don't know how long that's going to exist. But on the brighter side, there are banks that are opening up to servicing this industry and these companies. I don't think you'll see the big ones, the tier ones, coming in prior to federal legalization, but there are those on the tier two that are coming in and provided, so you can actually do ACH and that sort of.
Yeah.
The clearinghouse. I'm trying to remember all the actual meanings of these items.
Yeah, and it's just the banks that are opening up and becoming more cannabis friendly. It's great. I guess in my experience, I'm seeing some crazy fees that they are charging. I mean, it's high risk, and I get it,
Yeah, it is really high risk.
and it's just they're charging these crazy fees. But as let's say I'm an operator and I have a point of sale and I have a payment system within that point of sale that was sold to me as a feature. What are like the top 2 or 3 things that I should really know, like that are really critical for the compliance piece with that payment system?
For the compliance piece, make sure that they have the compliance pieces in it, built in. Ideally, if it's ideally it's a known solution. So as I mentioned previously, that compliance as a service is kind of table stakes in the financial world. So when I say anti-money laundering, there's checks and balances there. Know your customer, like identity verification, that's requirement, and that's in there. Your PCI, PII, all of that's built in. And as I mentioned, they do have their services. I know the PayPals of the world acquire these services and then open them up for others. But there's a lot of companies that provide these services as an API, just as Komplyd is, and the fintech companies are utilizing them and or acquiring them and having that part of their product. But they have to make sure all of these checkboxes are checked, and if you
Yikes.
once you can bring in a Stripe or a PayPal, which not having that, there's no concern because they have it all in there. If you read their agreements, they're like hundreds of pages, but because they have all of it.
Got it. Okay.
But the biggest thing is just making sure that they are compliant, that they're up, and all of these guardrails are in place.
Yeah. They
But
need a
I know that
checklist.
some are relying on payment systems that, like, one guy in, I think, Portland or Seattle is building. And like, I would be hesitant on
Yeah.
that. Very, very hesitant, just because I know the complexities and level of effort that goes into building these systems and maintaining them.
Yeah.
Because
And
everything's changing, you've got to continuously maintain them.
of course. Yep. Compliance is a moving target. You always got to. And it's tough because you don't know what you don't know. So it's
Mhm.
like when you're going out and vetting these software companies and trying to find something, and then they turn around and just sell you a feature of this payment system and you think that it's a great idea. You don't know what to ask. You don't know what is or isn't out of compliance. I feel a lot of these operators need a checklist or something to be like, yep,
Absolutely,
no.
absolutely. I mean, it's similar to, similar to, like, in cannabis compliance, or any compliance, like we're going for our SOC 2. You have that list, and you need to make sure that every checkbox is checked, and then you can claim to be SOC 2. Or for payments, and I would vet any system that I was bringing into my product very, very, very deeply.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, just don't know what you don't know, relying on a lot of these things. And sometimes it's tough because some of these operators, when they are vetting their systems, they're talking with salespeople. They're not talking with the product manager, the engineer, the compliance officer. And there might be, some influence there as to saying the right things as a salesperson to want to make the sale.
Mhm.
So to back up a minute to not talk so much about technology solutions and the payment systems, you mentioned HIPAA in Illinois. For some of our listeners, they probably know what HIPAA is, but do you mind unpacking what is HIPAA? Why is it important? What are those compliance pieces that software operators, people handling patient data really need to understand?
Right. So I can't get into the granular requirements of HIPAA,
For sure.
but essentially, it's all right. It's Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, but ultimately, what it means is protecting the patient's data, and that, when you think of PII and medical data, so on in general, GDPR for EU, CCPA, CPRA, the new one in California, there's others in the state. That's data protection for the user. HIPAA is similar, and it's get even stricter because it is people's personally identified medical information. And when you're passing someone's medical ID and, in some cases, their prescription for cannabis, their purchase limits or whatever, that's medical information, and that has to be handled by HIPAA. And once federal legalization comes, that is going to be required across the country. I believe Illinois is getting a heads up, or maybe it's actually required within their state, regardless of whether it's federally legal or not. But HIPAA is a federal requirement,
Yeah.
and yeah, so and that falls under just an umbrella of InfoSec. And just I wanted just to kind of back a little bit up, as we were talking about all the things that the business bringing in the payment system has to consider. InfoSec is a huge piece of it. Not just, then you get medical data, you've got your just personal identifiable data, and you've got uh, payment data. And all of that, there's so many rules and regulations around information security that must be adhered to. And PayPal and the likes of them, I wish I had the number off the top of my head, but they get hit, I think it's 100,000 times a day. People trying to break into their system. It's a
Whoa.
ridiculous. Don't quote me on that number,
Yeah.
but I know it's a ridiculously large number.
Wow.
And that actually got that number from their chief architect. So it's really, really large. And that's what your bad actors are going after systems.
Yeah.
constantly. And this industry, yes, I know that a couple of the track and traces have had data breaches, um, and won a couple of them, but it's huge. And as the industry grows, the attempts are going to become more.
Yeah.
People are going to be like, oh, this is very useful data for us to break into,
Right.
and do a ransomware for anything they can do. Bad actors do these things sometimes just for shits and giggles. Pardon my French.
Okay. Oh my goodness. There's just so many layers to it. And HIPAA is an interesting one because during my operation days, my COO at the time, like him and I would get in debates all the time about HIPAA and federal requirements and things like that. Cause he's like, we're not federally illegal. Like HIPAA doesn't apply to us. And I'm like, well, I guess from like a state regulatory standpoint in Colorado at the moment, because it's not in the state requirements, but I'm like, shouldn't we be preparing for this? Shouldn't we be putting in safeguards to make sure that our patient data doesn't go anywhere? I mean, 2017, as an operator, I experienced the absolutely epic MJ Freeway 2017 crash where all of the data was wiped clean. We had 7 years of patient data in there. And that was also a record retention requirement that we had to keep on file for Colorado, and it's just gone. And that was our source of truth and where our database was for everything. And our inventory was gone, our previous sales transactions were gone. We couldn't make data driven decisions because we had nothing to go by. And like all of these things were just such an infancy of this market that like we have such a long way to go, and with all of this federal requirements, HIPAA, cybersecurity, payment gateways, I mean, we've just only touched on a few buckets, and I know there's a ton more out there that you can speak to. It's just absolutely mind-boggling, and I'm so grateful that you have tackled this massive problem and that you are diving headfirst into it. I have not spoken with another company that is trying to solve the similar problems that you are. I mean, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like from previous conversations we've had, operators or people have just straight up told you like, good luck. Like this is a huge challenge and it's definitely needed, but good luck. Like show me like in a year.
I was literally told, I will love you if you can fix this. I'm like, really? Well,
Really?
okay.
You're gonna put a finger on it? Put a ring on it?
Yeah, exactly. Put a ring on it. Exactly. No, I mean, there is a solution. I mean, it's not an easy problem to solve. I want to say that. Like, it's not. It's challenging. Compliance in and out of cannabis is challenging. It's highly regulated industries. It is what it is. But that's what I'll go back to the API first companies. That's what we do. We focus on solving a hard problem and make it dead simple for the user. So we hide it. So I like it back all the way back to my UI days. Is that what is a good user interface? One you don't even recognize, you don't notice it. You just don't notice it. You're just able to do your job really easily, and nothing's jumping out. You just have a pleasurable experience using that product.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And
you don't even notice there's a great UI there. And that's what it is. You're just going to even know that it's hard.
Yeah.
Because we've abstracted that out, and that's what all of these companies are doing, and we're just following a model that, I mean, 15 years ago, no one in their right mind would have thought of using a third party for authentication or payments or their messaging services among identity verification. No way, that's too important. I could never give that to third party. Today, outside of cannabis, no one would consider building it unless that's their actual product.
Wow. Okay.
Unless they're trying to compete with them. Yeah. Then it's like, no, I'm just going to use a third party so I can focus on my core, build my product, focus on product differentiation, and build the best, whatever it is I'm building, whether that's a POS, ERP, whichever. It's going to be the best.
Love it. Absolutely. So with that being said, Rose, what is your hopes for the future? So if you had a magic wand and had 3 wishes for the industry, what would those wishes be?
3 is too. I have too many wishes. I want to start. So for us at Komplyd, we kind of call our vision is this world where everyone's life is improved via safe access to cannabis. So for me, the number one wish would be normalize.
Yeah.
The normalization of cannabis, meaning take away the stigma and let me go get the weed at CVS. It's no matter which research report you read, the majority, whether it's 60 something, 70 something, 90% of Americans believe some sort of legalization should be in place. And it's not just legal. I want it normalized. I want it to be, no, nobody even thinks twice about it. And that results into safe and affordable access for everyone. Of course, what would help get us there, other than federal legalization, is to streamline the compliance and better tax structures. So businesses, as you mentioned, the downturn. I mean, businesses are hurting right now, and part of that is, this in California, the tax structure is crazy. If Schumer gets, it's going to be another 25%.
Yeah,
It's kind of
mind-boggling.
crazy. But also that normalization and legalization, it's also, some of that is due to the 280. They can't expense their businesses. They're paying enormous amounts in taxes, and then they spend tons of money trying to remain compliant, just to remain legal. And then when you go into like California, which is where I live, I think it's still like 2/3 of the counties are still illegal to operate in. Right. So if you're, let's just say your mom uses cannabis for arthritis, if she can't get it at the corner at a nice dispensary with high quality and tested at a price she can afford, but there's a guy that she's been buying for, and maybe it's not tested, but she can afford it and she can get her medicine. Because that's what it is. It's medicine. Even if you're using it for health and wellness.
Agreed.
It's still, to me, whether you have a prescription or not, it is medicine. It's plant-based medicine. Mm-hmm. And so, and the lack of dispensaries, there's just all these reasons why this is happening. So if we can fix all these little things, but let's start with the tax structure, the 280, and simplifying compliance. That will take a huge burden, all of that. And of course, I think I was watching some of your podcasts, so I'm kind of stealing this from somebody else, but better social equity programs.
Yes.
That's really, really important.
Very important. It's so critically important. I mean, I truly believe the people that come from the legacy market that were impacted by the war on drugs, they deserve a place at the table. They deserve a license. This entire industry was built off of the backs of them. I'm not sure if you saw in New York, the governor signed a bill to release the first 200 retail licenses in New York to social equity certified folks, which I think is absolutely incredible and something that needs to happen. And even though, yes, social equity should be here and be able to have a license, they also need funding. Because that's the other piece.
I was just going to say, like, they need more than just the license.
Right?
They need training, funding.
And they have, and unfortunately, there's just been a lot of people that are predatory out there that are like, oh, I'll fund your business for 49%, because from a regulatory standpoint, they have to own 51% of the license to be able to be qualified as social equity. And now they're going out and getting a partner to help fund the business, but they're taking 49%. So in 2 years from now, when they want to scale and open up another storefront or something, they can't even go out and get the funding in exchange for equity because they can't go over that 51% threshold of not owning that business. Like, it's so absolutely mind-boggling. Just all of the red tape, the barriers to entry, how expensive it is. I saw on LinkedIn the other day, and I actually commented on the post and said, call these companies out immediately because
Mm-hmm.
some folks in New Jersey apparently are charging social equity folks $50,000 to $100,000 for the conditional license. And so, like, the conditional license, to kind of compare, all you have to do is develop a compliance plan. That compliance plan
Mm-hmm.
is telling you how, or not even how, but what you're going to do to comply with the regulatory framework. And it's 20 pages max. So it's like, it's really
Mm-hmm.
not an SOP or an operating plan or anything like that. You're
Right.
not doing step by step. You're just saying, I will do X, Y, and Z, and here's my plan to do that. You need a business plan, and then you need an insurance plan, which really,
Mm-hmm.
that insurance plan is just saying that you're going to be insured for X, Y, and Z. That's it. And the fact that people are charging $50,000 to $100,000 for that alone to social equity folks is just absolutely mind-boggling, and it's
Mm-hmm.
predatory, and it's extremely sad to see that consultants are doing that and taking advantage. And I think we have a long way to go on social equity programs. I think the East Coast is doing a really great job from learning from other people's mistakes. Here in Colorado, it took us 6-7 years to even implement a social equity program. So it's just, it's, I agree. So long-winded, but yes, I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot that can be done there, and hopefully the newer states coming on are actually learning, and hopefully those in
Yeah.
states that hopefully those that didn't do it correct are fixing it
Yeah.
or can fix it.
Yeah.
But we're all very passionate about that. We are not a social equity company, which is our founders, but we are D&I.
Yeah.
So, but I do anything I can to help, because it's just even not just social equity founders. What I've seen is some of the solution, not their ERPs and POSs, but software solutions that all of us need to use. Um, if you're in cannabis, because I guess the high risk, but they really, really charge a lot. And some of them are geared to the cannabis industry, and they charge a real lot. It's like, and I don't even mean financial stuff. I mean just like a administrative software solution that we would all need.
Yeah.
And it's just, and I'm shocked. I'm like, you do that to the cannabis space,
Yeah.
even though like you're built just for cannabis, where it's not, you're not taking a high risk. It's not that. It's just, that there's not a lot of options
Yeah.
for your
Absolutely.
users. So you're going to price
Price
gouge
gouge.
them.
Yep. Exactly. Just insane.
I was trying to say it in a nice way.
But it's what it is. So just say it. Well, Rose, this was such a great conversation. Before we wrap up, do you have any last words? How can people get a hold of you? Feel free to self-promote here.
Yeah, so just for those who don't understand compliance as a service platform, we are building an API first technology for businesses to enter into each new market and maintain compliance. So everything mostly for reporting, monitoring, alerting, and fraud detection. Um, there's more to cannabis compliance than that, just that. You and I may have talked about it. There's the operational side of things with the physical audits, etc. And then there's the training and consulting piece that everybody needs. They come in and if you use them right away, you do good. If you don't, then you're coming in to clean up after the audit.
My life.
Exactly. But there's we call it the three-legged stool of the compliance beast, cannabis compliance beast, or any compliance beast really, and compliance space. And at Komplyd, we are solving for that technical automation piece. And if you're looking for a solution like that, or if you're looking to, or you just even want to see what we're doing and how it works, definitely reach out to me. I'm Rose at komplyd.com with a K and a Y. um, yeah,
Love it.
so KOMPLYD. But I'd love to talk to people. I love to meet people in the industry. It's a fantastic space, and we're all only just beginning. It's an
Isn't that the
exciting
truth?
ride we're on.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? And I love your three-prong approach. I think you said you got that from one of your engineers or one of your other team members, and I
Yeah.
steal it all the time. I give you credit, but I steal it all the time. I'm like, a three-prong approach. We got compliance, we got tech, we got operations, and or the operations is like training and documentation
Yeah,
with operating plans.
yeah.
Like,
And
there's so much.
you need to do it all. You need
Yeah,
to adhere to it all. Not one of those legs is going to hold up that beast. You need all three.
yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Perfect. Well, let's end on that note. And thank you so much for taking
Great.
the
Thank you
time
so much,
today.
Bree.
Yeah,
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
absolutely.